Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Dharma Breeze, brought to you by the Ekoji Buddhist Temple. This is a service that we get a little shot in the arm to hear the Dharma in the middle of the week and hopefully help us get through the end of the week in a more Buddhistic way. So tonight, I'd like us to start our service by doing a silent sitting meditation. So if you could please sit straight in your chair with your feet flat on the floor and relaxing your shoulders. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats. Okay. So tonight we're going to be chanting the Junirai. You have it in the PDF. This is a more melodic chant. It's a little bit on the longer side. And for that purpose, I'd like to chant at a little bit of a faster beat. So please follow along with me for the Junirai. Genshu Tennin Shokugyo Amida Senjo Zokuson Zai Mimyu Anako Muryo Bushi Shuinyu Konjiki Shinjo Nyosen no Shama Tagyo Nyozobu Gyomoku Jonyaku Shorenge Koga Chorai Mirason Menzen Enjo Nyomangatsu Iko Yunyo Sennichi Gatsu Shonyo Tenku Kushira Koga Chorai Minason Kwan non Chodai Kwan Chuju Shuju Myoso Hoshogon Nobukugedo Makyoman Koga Chorai Mirason Mubi Muku Koshojo Shutoku Kyoketsu Nyokoku Shosadi Yakutoku Jizai Koga Chorai Midason Jippo Myomon Bosashu Muryo 修馬共産団、一生修上願力中、子が将来未来損、根体保険知書系、前後症状明大座、お膝上尿線の子が将来未来損、実法将来勝負し、権限人図深夜なく、戦後草原上業、子が将来未来損、小無常無我と、薬尿水月伝尿路、一生説法無明寺、子が将来未来損、依存不説無悪名、薬無尿に悪道不、主任知心教非損、子が将来未来損、一損無料法勉強、無少種悪知識、往生不体死菩提、子が将来未来損、画説非損功徳寺、修善無変、尿海水、小逆前言、小乗車、摂取、上小非公、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、ナマダム、願にしく読、平等正祭、同図菩提心、往生なと。Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see all of you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good, good. Thank you. So tonight, I want to talk about a particular teaching of Shinran Shonin, the founder of our school of Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu. We are in the middle of celebrating Shinran Shonin's birthday. So actually here and at Ekoji last Sunday, we celebrated Gotane. And then I will be celebrating Gotane at the Seabrook Temple in New Jersey this coming Sunday. And when we reflect upon celebrating the founder of our denomination, we try to remember the teachings that he taught that were unique and special that help us with our understanding of the Buddhist teachings or the Dharma in our everyday life. But for me, as I've been part of the Jodo Shinshu community this is my 35th year that I've been part of the BCA Sangha. I started in Seattle many years ago, and about 15 years of this 35-year journey has been as a minister. But as a lay member, I met so many people and went to so many discussions over the years. And every time I think about the teachings and Shinran Shonin, I have the sense of gratitude. And as I've mentioned before, and the concept of gratitude is very important in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism because we realize that we are so fortunate to be exposed to the teachings. All of us here are virtual representations of places from all over the United States, and how fortunate it is for us to be able to hear the teachings of Shinran Shonin, and a natural expression of that is gratitude. When I gave the talk on Sunday here in New York, it was also Mother's Day. And we talk about the different levels of gratitude. And I think for us that are older, and by looking at a lot of the screenshots, I think a lot of us are baby boomers, if not virtually everybody's a baby boomer. And so we've had some life experience, and we've been raised by our parents, and probably quite a few of us have lost our parents over the years. And I was surprised when I calculated that my mother passed 21 years ago. It doesn't seem possible. I joked about that if it was a person, they'd be graduating from college now. But the idea of gratitude is that when we have these relationships, just like when we have a relationship with the Dharma, as we get older, it matures and has a different level. And when I was growing up as the self-proclaimed baby boomer, I did not have any unsolved needs for materialistic items. I was a square middle-class baby boomer with my parents very happy providing for us. Both of my parents were raised in the Depression and went through World War II. And it wasn't until I was older that my mother would tell me things that were inconceivable to me. Both of my parents talked about during their childhood sometimes going to bed hungry at night. The idea for me to, oh, I'll skip a meal, or I don't have time to eat, or I don't want to eat. But the idea that my parents actually had a lifestyle that they were hungry at night was very humbling to me. And I shared a story, and I'll share it really quickly with you, that shows how different my lifestyle was than my parents. My mother's father worked for Weyerhaeuser, which is the largest lumber producer in the world, especially this is pre-war. And for those that have Japanese American descent, there was a huge Japanese American population that worked for Weyerhaeuser as well. And so my mother would go to school, and there's all the different kids, and the kids that had the parents that worked in management, they would pull out their lunch sacks, and they'd have this beautiful factory-made or store-bought white bread that my mother was very envious of, and they'd have bologna sandwiches. And my mother would be so embarrassed because she had homemade bread, which we would all love now, and her peanut butter and her honey and is oozing all over the place, and she would be so embarrassed eating the sandwich in front of the other kids. Then one day, a miracle happened. My mother opened the bag, and there was a beautiful white bread bologna sandwich. And my mom says, laughing at me, telling me this story many years later, I should have known better, but she bit into it and it just was in ecstasy that she had the sandwich. And then a girl started crying across the cafeteria. It was the manager's daughter, and she's holding up my mother's peanut butter sandwich with the honey oozing out of it, crying hysterically. And my mother was mortified. And my mother telling me the story, like I said, really made me realize that how much support that my parents from that generation gave me, that they went through experiences like that I never did, and that how they nurtured me, and the gratitude for myself, even now, 21 years after both my mother passed, it just increases to grow. And I think this appreciation of gratitude and it developing and maturing over the years is also how I feel about that, like we're talking about today, about the Buddha Dharma, specifically Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And one of the nice things about having one of these celebrations here in New York, there's three ministers' assistants, so we're all in our formal robes, and we have the kero when we're throwing the petals, and we have special flowers, and the service was very beautiful. But also the service, because we're honoring Shinran Shonin, I was in the back room getting ready for service, and Gary, one of our minister's assistants here, says, "Sensei, Kurt, do you remember this book?" And this book is called December Fan. So some of you, probably old timers, are familiar with this. And I'm apologizing before I start about this because this is not in publication anymore. I checked the key websites and it says it's not available. However, I do know that maybe through the temples you have access to it. And the reason what was nice is the celebration of Shinran Shonin is that he reminded me of a teaching that I read maybe 15, 20 years ago. When we try to discuss Shinran Shonin and his concepts, sometimes we get bogged down in language, which we've talked about before. We talk about self-power and other power. And I know personally sometimes that when we have these discussions, when I hear the same terminology over and over, my mind kind of freezes up, or I don't really appreciate it. Then sometimes there are people that will express the writings in a way that gives it a different nuance. And tonight I'd like to share that with you. So what I have here is this book is called December Fan, and it's an interesting history. So not giving an in-depth history lesson, but Jodo Shinshu practice was basically frozen for many hundreds of years during the Tokugawa, the medieval period, when Japan was shut down to the outside world and new Buddhist thought didn't come in. So ironically, at the beginning of this, in the Kamakura era, you've got Shinran doing the Nembutsu, you've got Dogen doing Zen, you've got Nichiren doing Nichiren-shu, all this excitement, but then everything comes to a halt under the shogunate. And so instead of debating, all they would do is the temples would take themselves and they would debate themselves on what did Shinran say, and they go back and forth. And so the thoughts just kind of froze in time for a couple, 300 years. Then when Japan opened to the West, or was forced open to the West, I should say, in the modernization and what we call the Meiji era, which is basically our Victorian era, all of these floods of ideas came in from the West, philosophy, science, all of this type of methodology that the Japanese weren't used to. They absorbed it fairly quickly. And what happened is that did not only go to the scientific field, it also went into Buddhist studies. So as many of you know, that our denomination, Jodo Shinshu, is divided into two main schools, the Nishi school, which is the Western school, which we belong to, BCA, and then there's the Higashi school, which are fairly equal size in Japan. What's happened is that over time, each of those schools, the East and the West, developed their own universities. And so our school, the Western school, tends to be a little more traditional, but Higashi, the Eastern school, exploded at this time of the Meiji restoration with ideas, bringing in scientific ideas, bringing in Western philosophical ideas on how to talk about Buddhism. I think the person that most of us are aware of is D.T. Suzuki. He is a product of this era of coming through and actually speaking in English and coming to America promoting Buddhism. And though he promoted Zen Buddhism, his mother was a very devout Shin Buddhist, and he also said that he really regarded the Shin teachings. In fact, D.T. Suzuki, the last project when he passed away, he was translating Shinran's Kyogyo Shinsho. So that shows you how he appreciated Shinran's teachings. But at this time, there was a gentleman, his name was Manashi Kiyozawa, and he was a monk. And he was very well versed, and he did a lot of writings, and he loved the Western concept of science and finding facts, and was considered one of the great minds. Unfortunately, he only lived from 1863 to 1903. He died young of tuberculosis and did not finish his works. But in his works, he investigated how to explain Jodo Shinshu Buddhism through maybe a more Western perspective. So Gary, my good Dharma friend and fellow minister here in New York, reminded me of this passage. And this passage that I would like to talk about is in December Fan. And this was translated by Nubo Haneda, who many of you are familiar with, who has the study center in Berkeley. Actually, you probably could get a copy of this going to his webpage. And this one is called Liberation Through Power Beyond Self. And so, first of all, there's two words that are very interesting to our ears. There's liberation and then power beyond self. And so what I like to say is that I like the wording of power beyond self means other power is what we normally translate that as. But in this way, talking from our own egotistical perspective of us and me, it's power beyond self. So I think it does give it a little bit of a different connotation. And so he wrote this in honor of Shinran Shoni's birthday. And what I'd like to do is, before I start reading this, it's a very short passage, don't worry. It's what it is it tries to break down our dualistic thinking about self-power and other power. And so what it talks about is liberation. Now, liberation is a very strong word. So when I hear that as growing up as someone in the Christian faith, I take up probably a different connotation. But what the author here is referring to is liberation from ourselves. It's not from something else. It's liberation from our ego, liberation from our everyday attachments. So what it is talking about liberation from ourselves and from our own egos. And so he starts off with this passage saying, when I am aware of liberation through power beyond myself, power, other power, the way to live my life becomes clear to me. Okay, so when he's thinking about not himself, the way of life becomes clear to him. When I forget liberation through self-power, my life becomes uncertain. So again, at this stage of his life, he's writing this in his late 30s, early 40s. He's, not in good health, and he's probably focusing on the afterlife. And so he's writing these very personal passages. So he's saying, when I think of self-power, when I think of other power, my life flows. When I'm not thinking about it, in other words, being self-centered, then there's blockage and my life becomes uncertain. When I'm aware of liberation through power beyond self, I am seldom led astray by desire. And so it's interesting. So he's talking about when he's thinking about not himself, is that he doesn't get wrapped up into his own situations. Desire does not necessarily mean sensual desire. It could mean other things, wanting, craving, thinking about other things, desiring material things. And it says, when I forget liberation through power self, I'm often deluded by desire. And so again, when we talk about self-power and other power, he's being very clear here that he is deluded by his own desire, by his own attachments and his own needs. He says, when I'm aware of liberation through power beyond self, a light brightens up whatever I do. Okay, again, so he says when it's beyond power, the light brightens up with whatever I do. So we've talked before about the iconography or the symbolism of Jodo Shinshu and Amida Buddha. And he's referring to the idea that Buddha is infinite life and infinite light. And so when we see the statue or see the scroll or the portrait of Amida Buddha, there's all these rays of light that are coming out behind it. Actually, for us in Nishi school, there's 48 rays of light representing the 48 vows that Dharmakara took. And so what it is again, the light shines equally on all and has no shadows. So he's making reference to these traditional Jodo Shinshu ideals about that the light shines on me. And then he reverses and he says, when I forget liberation through power beyond self, darkness covers whatever I do. And I like that. So the darkness means ignorance, not intellectual ignorance, but it means spiritual ignorance. And so the light gets turned off. For those of us that have read Jeff Wilson's book, there's a great chapter where he talks about turning off the light and bumping into all the furniture and getting mad because you're bumping into the furniture and it's not the furniture, it's ourself. And so that's a reference also to what Dr. Wilson wrote. So then again, because he's expressing this as a declaration of his philosophy and his faith, he goes, liberation through power beyond self. How my awareness of it frees me from the world of delusion and suffering. Now, I think this is a good point because sometimes when we talk about self-power and other power, we say, is there any input? Is there anything that we have that we can help with this process? And here he's saying lifting the idea of delusion helps us to be able to see things as they truly are. So there is this interconnection that is not completely done by other power completely, that there is some self-reflection. It says, if I had not been for Shinran's teachings about liberation through the power beyond self, I would never have avoided confusion and despair. Thanks to his teachings, I can enjoy a life in a bright ocean filled with serene winds, even though I'm in darkness filled with waves of defilement. Okay, I'm going to read that again because, again, it's beautiful. It's very Buddhistic. So it's not like we are getting rid of something. It's not like it's all going to disappear. Is that these things continue to go on in our lives. And so he says, thanks to his teaching, I can enjoy my life in a bright ocean filled with serene winds. And even though I am in darkness, filled with the waves of defilement. Again, try to look at this in a non-dualistic way. So at the same time that you're in this ocean with the swirling winds, but it's also dark, working through that process. And then the last sentence, it says, how empty are these trivial words of my gratitude and praise and warmth before the greatness of Shinran. So again, what he's doing is he's talking about the idea of Shinran Shonin being the guiding light for us. There was Shakyamuni Buddha, of course, that started the Dharma, the wheel of Dharma rolling, that continued through the centuries, through all the different countries and cultures that eventually went to China and Japan. And then Shinran Shonin was exposed to the teachings and helped clarify this idea of self-power and other power, and the idea of being attached and the breaking down of the ego. So I hope that these choice of words and will be interesting in our conversation to see if these words resonate with you, or if maybe it makes it more confusing about this idea of self-power and other power. But it's wonderful to be able to read these words that are over 100 years old, that were written in dedication to Shinran Shonin out of gratitude for his teachings. So please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadatsu. Great. Now, if we could do the group reading together, if we could go read together our pledge, which is a PDF that's provided in the Dropbox. Okay. Okay, our pledge. Number one, breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Number two, not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Number three, not putting myself first, I will share in the joys and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Number four, realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Datsu. Okay, so before we go to the discussion group and turn off the camera, could everybody please join me in another short silent meditation, sitting straight in your chair, feet flat on the floor, and your shoulders relaxed. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Das.